Right. Well, thank you for all for being with us tonight. We are excited to see you and to kick off this special event. This is an exciting moment for NIRS for a number of reasons. For one, it's a chance to kick off the new year with our community of activists, friends, and supporters, as well as to update you on the last year of major developments. We are preparing to launch a new phase of NIRS's mission and work and want to give you a preview of the exciting efforts that we are launching. In 2023, we're entering our 45th anniversary year. Which is a great time to take stock of all the work that we've done and look forward to making good on our mission for a nuclear-free, carbon-free world. And especially in terms of tonight's topic of energy democracy, it's obviously a really sort of poignant theme for the work that we're doing, especially in light of all the discussions and concerns about democracy in light of the January 6th incidents and the ongoing attacks on democracy, the investigations that the Congress has been doing, and really there. And I hope you'll get a clearer sense of this as we go through tonight. But there is a broader landscape of democracy as it relates to our energy systems, as it relates to our environment, as it relates to climate, that is also really important and not disconnected from the broader political trends that we've that we've been dealing with the last few years. And so hopefully, we'll get a sense of kind of what our work is looking like at NIRS in terms of all this, and to get fired up about it, because this is really kind of a sort of a barn raising event, for this new phase of work that that the NIRS is really throwing down for in the coming year, and so we're going to get started with that, and in a moment, we do want to sort of begin with some acknowledgements about about land and about our Indigenous brothers and sisters, because when we do in-person events for NIRS, we do think it's important to acknowledge the history and the heritage of the land that we're on, and even now that we're mostly been doing things virtually, in Zoom, the last 3 years since the beginning of the pandemic. These issues of of the land that we are on, the history of colonialism and an exploitation of the land and violations of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, rights and treaties. It's the issues that we work on in terms of nuclear energy and nuclear power are intimately connected with that history in a very deep way. And so even though we're in a virtual setting, we thought it was important we think it's important to acknowledge that, and I think, and from NIRS is grounding NIRS and where we're located, while our staff are distributed across different parts of the country, we are headquartered in the Washington, D.C. metro area, on the traditional lands of the Piscataway and the Nacotchtank peoples, and it was never ceded to the United States formally, and that is occupied land. And we know that these same conditions exist in many parts of the country where where many of you are from, where many of us are located personally. And we think it's important to ground the discussions about the issues that we work on in that reality. So with that, we're going to start the event, and we really encourage you, to get in the spirit of helping us barn raise for this work on energy democracy. The link to the donation platform is in the chat. So we encourage everyone to as you feel motivated to make a contribution there. All these contributions are being matched by another generous supporter. So this really is, a community fundraising effort to kick off this area of work. And with that, we want to kind of dig into some details and give you some of the things to get fired up about. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give some different people at NIRS are going to give some presentations on different aspects of energy democracy and the work that we're doing. We're going to start with Hannah Smay, our digital organizer, who's going to kind of lay out the broad sort of agenda of energy democracy that the NIRS is moving into and working on in a deeper way. I'm going to kind of give some bigger context about really how this vitally relates to the fights to phase out nuclear power and fossil fuels, and and to transition to renewables and to save our climate. And then Dean Dorigo is going to give some sense of kind of how this relates back to some of the really sort of foundational issues for NIRS in terms of radioactive waste and and pollution. So with that, I think we really just we want to get started and to dig into this. And so please, as you feel inspired, make a contribution at the donation link that Quinn put in the chat. And I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to kick us off.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everybody. And just a note, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. We'll be checking the Q&A box for questions. And if you have other comments or want to say hi and say your name and where you're from, you can put that in the chat. But we have separate Q&A for questions. So let me get set up here. Well, again, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate seeing you all here, and I'm very enthused to have your support in our fight for energy democracy, for climate and justice, and a nuclear-free future. As Tim said, my name is Hannah Smay, and I'm a digital organizer with NIRS. It may come as no surprise that the nuclear industry in the US is frankly a threat to democracy. Corporations, lobbyists, corrupt politicians are all actively working to undermine the democratic process and influence energy policy on the state level, on the federal level, to line their own pockets. And we've seen this very acutely in the two major infrastructure bills passed since the Biden administration took power. So one is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. These two bills were essentially held hostage by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who is crony-in-chief of the fossil fuel and nuclear energy industries, until he got what he wanted, which was billions of dollars in subsidies for dirty energy and only pithy amounts of funding for true climate solutions, which are renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate justice investments in frontline communities. Here at NIRS, we work every day to combat these undemocratic energy interests and put the power back in the hands of voters, constituents, and communities. On a daily basis, we fight misinformation and outright lies from the pro-nuclear lobby, lies like nuclear energy is clean and carbon-free, when in reality, nuclear energy is dirty, expensive, and carbon-intensive if you account for the entire fuel and waste chain. We fight lies like nuclear fusion is right around the corner, when nuclear fusion is nowhere near being applied to our energy needs. And we combat lies like newfangled, quote, advanced nuclear reactors are safe and clean, when in reality, they are in fact more dangerous, more dirty, and a massive waste of time, resources, and funding in the fight to solve the climate crisis. Tonight, we're rallying the resistance to the corporate nuclear energy agenda and saying yes to energy democracy. Our vision for energy democracy is a vision of community health, resilience, and empowerment, of justice, and of cultivating opportunities to build community. By framing our efforts around energy democracy, we are fighting the status quo, where energy is a commodity that is commercially exploited, and instead, we're buying into energy as a shared resource that connects all of us to one another and connects us to the environment. Energy democracy guides us not only in fighting for the transition away from fossil fuels and nuclear power and towards renewable energy, but also in the shift away from corporate control of energy systems. Rather than corporate behemoths, monopolies, and corrupt government agencies controlling the power, things like solar energy, wind, geothermal energy, energy conservation, efficiency, and storage can all be developed in all communities and designed to serve the needs of each community. So as we fight to end nuclear power, at the same time, we're building the foundations of a democratic energy future, one where communities are empowered to make decisions about their energy. Now, you might be wondering how we do that, and you'll hear more about our work throughout our talk tonight, but essentially we educate the public on how and when they can make an impact by contacting their elected officials, intervening in their local, regional, and federal policy forums to ensure that frontline voices are heard. And we also provide education about the environmental and social detriments of nuclear energy to combat the misinformation from nuclear boosters and right-wing think tanks that are trying to hoodwink the climate movement into buying into nuclear as a climate solution. What we need, and what our efforts to promote energy democracy promise to achieve, is an energy system that does not run on undemocratic lobbying, bribery, and campaign contributions. We need to end the trend of settling for false climate solutions and sacrificing frontline communities. Utilities and power companies are able to exploit and pollute, endanger, and control these communities through political power that they exert over regulators and over policymakers. frontline and impacted communities and grassroots organizations we work with, they face high barriers to participation in regulatory proceedings that vitally affect them, and they have limited capacity and resources to assert their rights and enforce change. We must work strategically to win energy democracy and utility reforms that reset the balance of power and ensure that impacted communities and grassroots organizations have the access, the resources, and the capacity to make the change that we need. So at NIRS, we're building momentum with our grassroots allies and our community partners towards achieving a strong national policy for climate, economy, and environmental justice. And in 2023, we're jumping right in, working with groups across the Southeast to develop educational and advocacy materials and advancing real reforms that give people a voice in energy decisions. This work is happening in the realm of public utility commissions or PUCs or similar agencies that regulate utility companies. And these are places where boots on the ground organizing can really make a tremendous impact on what kinds of energy sources will power communities in the coming years. We're providing resources to help citizens understand how these public agencies provide oversight for utilities and advocate for, again, balancing the dynamic between the utility and the customer so that it puts the needs of the customers first. Reforms that make it easier to engage in the public process will result in lower bills, diversified and reliable energy choices, a just and equitable transition, and better climate resiliency. Energy democracy grows by people demanding space for public comments and hearings, fair elections, and processes deciding who makes up these commissions, and safeguards against conflicts of interest between utility companies and the regulators. It is these efforts and more that NIRS is working on in 2023. So tonight, we're inviting you to join our efforts. We depend on contributions from our supporters to succeed, and we need your help to reach more members of Congress with grassroots voices and expert opinions. We need your support to recruit and support activists in states fighting the nuclear industry, from reactor communities to waste sites to communities fighting the impacts of uranium extraction. And we need your help building up our network of grassroots activists to mount a powerful opposition to the titans of big nuclear. So this holiday season, please consider supporting NIRS and our mission to build a democratic, just, sustainable energy future. I will be around to answer questions towards the end, but for now, let's send it back to Tim.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And like I mentioned before, the Quinn has put the link in the chat. And Quinn, can you give us an update on where we are with the with the fundraising?
I sure can.
Great. Well, we're making some great progress. We're almost halfway to our goal for this event. So thank you everyone for chipping in the way you have. And as I mentioned before, as you feel inspired, please donate. And if you feel like donating again, that'd be great. There's also the option to sign up to make a monthly donation or recurring donation. And so you can see, in the donation form, the little toggle button that you can pick there to change your donation to a monthly donation if you'd like to do that. And that would really, sort of keep this work going in a really vital and stable way. With picking up on some of the themes that Hannah was just talking about, I kind of wanted to ground this in really, I think, kind of the lived experience of many of us if you've ever taken on your power company over any kind of issue, whether it's shutting a power plant or getting getting renewables, or just the cost of your utility rates. I think all of us have sort of come to sort of feel like the system is sort of rigged by the utility companies and the control that they have over over the way that they're regulated and what we're charged and what what kind of power sources they're able to use. And I think that for me, I came to this after in just exactly that way, having been a grassroots activist, trying to to protect my community from the dangers of the nuclear power plants that were nearby. But so I think that but I think this is really a visceral issue. I mean, most of us can feel the need for energy democracy in our guts every time we pay our utility bills. we're sick of paying too much money for dirty energy we don't want, to utilities that pay that don't care about us or our communities, that shut off people's power because they can't afford the high rates the utilities lobby for, and that they use our own money to raise those rates. In most parts of the country, it's almost a universal truth. People love to hate their utility company, but that's not true everywhere, and it doesn't have to be that way. Before I came to NIRS, I was a grassroots activist in Syracuse, New York, where people have been organizing for decades to shut down the 3 reactors there, and always getting stonewalled, always getting blocked, even though there were outrageous safety problems, even though there were leaks and accidents and cover-ups going on. And the companies shouldn't even have been allowed to have the keys to a car, much less to a nuclear reactor. But they kept on getting approvals and and their rates raised and the ability to keep these things running. So we've seen the corruption of the utility companies and the nuclear industry up front. One of the most powerful campaigns that I was a part of was actually to start a nonprofit, municipally owned utility owned by the city and controlled by the people that controlled by people that we would elect. It would have saved the people in Syracuse $70 million per year, and we would have had almost universal support in the community for it, even on the city council. But the utility, got to the mayor, and then they got to the next mayor, and they blocked it from moving forward. And they were going to charge the community, they were going to charge Syracuse hundreds of millions of dollars just to, quote, leave their system to start our own power company. And so the system was rigged from the start, and the state allowed that to happen. Many communities in the US do have community-owned power companies, which are controlled by locally elected boards who run the power company as a nonprofit service to the local residents and businesses. There's direct accountability there. None of them is perfect, but community-owned utilities do exist, and they generally provide more affordable and more responsive service to their customers. But it is very hard, too hard, for communities to start up their own utility once private utilities have the franchise to provide electric and gas service for profit. So when we talk about energy democracy, it can take a number of forms, from community-owned energy to having democratic rights and controls to regulate the private utility companies, and for the public to be directly involved in that process. And so I think there's and we've seen the range of this in reality. There's really the good and the bad and the ugly. There's really been, a lot of corruption in the utility industry for a very long time. And we're seeing it, in spades these days, actually. But in our early years, NIRS worked on several public referendum campaigns against nuclear reactors and emergency plans, a form of direct energy democracy that really had a big impact. We worked on the campaign for a public referendum to close the Rancho Seco reactor in Sacramento, California, which actually succeeded and closed the reactor the very next day. We worked on public referenda in Portland, Oregon, to close the Trojan reactor, where the referenda didn't pass, although they got close, but it created the public pressure and the momentum that closed the reactor when when there were safety problems that really created a stir. We worked with people in New York around opposing the evacuation plans for the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which again didn't succeed, but it built the movement that eventually did close Indian Point years later. And we also worked with people, on Long Island in New York to close the Shoreham reactor, where the local community did pass a referendum to close the reactor, and also where communities refused to participate in the emergency planning in the emergency plans for Shoreham. That again didn't close the reactor, but it built the pressure to where the state eventually did close the reactor. And so there's democracy isn't just energy democracy isn't just having the right to a hearing, but it's also creating the pressure within our democracy to make big things happen. We've seen the energy democracy in terms of people winning interventions at public utility commissions. In Indiana, which is now a deeply red state, but people were able to win utility cases that stopped the Marble Hill and Bailey nuclear power plants. And in fact, they won a large enough settlement that it actually created a fund that has, for over 3 decades now, been funding the public to participate in the Public Utility Commission in Indiana and fight the utilities on their own ground. And when we saw this happen in California 9 years ago with the San Onofre nuclear power plant, where because the public had the right to intervene at the Utility Commission and to be funded to do it, environmental groups were able to stop the utility from getting cost recovery for the maintenance problems and the safety problems that it caused, and then shut the nuclear power plant down. And we saw this play out again in historic fashion 6 years ago in California, with the historic agreement to phase out the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant and make sure that it's replaced with 100% renewable energy and with a just transition for the communities and the workers that were going to be affected by that. These are the big things that energy democracy can accomplish, is accelerating the transition to clean energy and to creating the best outcomes for communities. And so that's why we need more of it. We've also seen the vulnerability of the limited state of energy democracy in the country, even in California, where now this year, in outrageous fashion, the governor has essentially trashed and overridden the phase-out agreement for Diablo Canyon and is trying to keep that reactor running now, even though there was, despite the earthquake faults that run underneath and around the site. And the fact that today there was a big earthquake, just a few hundred miles north of Diablo Canyon on the coastline in California, near the Humboldt Bay nuclear power plant. It's luckily closed down, but it still has nuclear waste sitting. We saw it happen in New York in 2016, when, despite the fact that the public has the right to be involved in utility commission proceedings in New York, the governor basically ordered the utility commission to implement a $7.6 billion bailout for the old reactors there. Overriding without considering any alternatives like energy efficiency. And we've seen even more than that. We've seen the evidence of energy industry corruption, the lack of energy democracy all over the country. Just in the last few years, there have been, there's federal corruption investigations in Illinois and Ohio over nuclear bailout legislation there, where there's, been fines levied on the utilities of $200 million. In each case, legislators, lobbyists, and corporate executives have been indicted. We've seen it happen you've seen the federal fraud investigation in South Carolina over the failed Summer nuclear power plant construction debacle, where ratepayers are being charged $9 billion for the failed construction of those reactors, even though utility executives knew the project was going to be a failure years before. We've seen Entergy hiring people as actors to attend public utility commission meetings in Louisiana to be able to push the construction of a gas plant in an environmental justice community. We've seen the public utility commissioners who were bought and paid for in Georgia by the Southern Company gerrymandering their own districts in order to keep challengers who are opposed to the Vogtle project from being able to run against them. And then, in really tragic and classic fashion, we've seen it happen at the federal level with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill in the last year, where despite the clear demands of the climate and environmental justice movements and the momentum coming off of the 2020 elections to pass transformative energy and climate legislation in this country, the nuclear industry itself, spent $60 million on lobbying in 2021 to make sure that didn't happen and to dirty up those bills as much as possible, and to force us to have to fight against bad stuff and instead of being able to focus on fighting for the good things that we need. We were even in the course of the fight over the Build Back Better Act in 2021. We found that Exelon Corporation itself, the largest nuclear power company in the country, with its trade group, spent nearly $800,000 on donations to Congress members last year, and specifically targeting, people, like Joe Manchin, who ended up carrying water for them in trying to get these nuclear subsidies passed, and eventually did get them passed this summer with the Inflation Reduction Act. So, but the extent of this type of corporate corruption really starts at the state and community level. all of the major nuclear power companies, at least until very recently, are also utility companies. And in every state, the utility industry is one of the most powerful political players. Their profits depend on getting utility commissions to approve as high a rates as they can get. So for decades, utility companies have been, quote, investing in politics and lobbying to make sure they get what they want from utility commissions and legislators and governor as reliably as possible. The recent corruption cases came up because they just went too far in some cases, but they have revealed a much larger and more pervasive problem. Utility companies are using our money to buy off politicians and pressure policymakers all the time, but they're exploiting legal loopholes to hide it. So, as part of one of the aftermaths of the Ohio corruption scandal, where First Energy spent $61 million in 2019 buying off state legislators through dark money and political action committees and whatnot. The utility commissions in Ohio, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, where First Energy operates utility companies, did investigations to figure out where that $61 million came from. And what they found is that First Energy wasn't just using Ohio ratepayers' money to buy off these politicians in Ohio. They were using money from the ratepayers in all these other states. And even worse than that, Maryland investigation found that the First Energy wasn't just doing that in the HB6 bailout scandal in Ohio. They were using ratepayer money, millions of dollars of ratepayer money, to fund other political activities. Like, for instance, in 2017, the Trump administration proposed this national bailout of coal and nuclear power plants, which luckily we defeated, but that no one really knew where it came from. And it turns out that First Energy was bankrolling the lobbying of the Trump administration to propose this national bailout for the coal and nuclear industries, again, using ratepayer money that it's not allowed to do. But the utility commissions aren't requiring full disclosure of political contributions and lobbying activities that are done with ratepayer money. So there's a lot of things that can, so through energy democracy reforms, primarily even at the state level, we can accomplish a lot. We can be requiring utility commissioners to be independent from the industries that they regulate, and that that the public have representation on public utility commissions. We could reform the rules so the public can participate fully in utility regulation and make intervener funds available to support them in doing that. We have that policy in California, and it's really made a huge difference in both Diablo Canyon and San Onofre and in so many other things. We can ensure communities have the right to run their own power systems without obstruction by the for-profit utility companies. So we can have grassroots control of where we get our energy from, and be making decisions that are about the best things for our communities and for our environment. So with all that said, here's the ask. We need your help to reach more people in Congress, to recruit and support activists in states fighting the nuclear industry, and to expose the corruption of the nuclear industry through building relationships with the press. And we need your help to win utility reforms and energy democracy at the state level, so we can speed up the phase out of nuclear power and fossil fuels and a just transition to clean renewable energy. Some people see the urgency of the climate and nuclear waste crises before us, and they say we don't have time to wait for democracy. We just gotta get emissions down as quickly as we can and not worry about the process. But the reality is, it's the lack of energy democracy that is killing us. We have to keep the fight up on all fronts, and we will. But if we can advance energy democracy reforms, it will make it all easier, and we can achieve progress faster that way. So again, please, if you feel inspired, to support this work, help us raise the bar for energy democracy and make a contribution at the link that Quinn provided. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dee after we get an update from Quinn on where we are with the fundraising.
Absolutely. Let's see. And Denise, do you have me spotlighted? I can share this. We just surpassed our halfway mark about 2 donations ago, so we're doing really great. Thank you guys for everything.
That's really terrific. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. It really makes a huge difference, and we're over halfway there.
And like Tim mentioned, there is an option here for a one-time or a monthly recurring donation, even if it's $3.50 a month, a cup of coffee. it helps us tremendously. So consider possibly making a monthly donation as well.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Quinn. And also thanks for all the questions and the comments in the chat. Again, it's just as a reminder, if you want to have a question posed to the panelists, please type it into the Q&A. We've got a lot of questions, and we're only going until 8:30 Eastern, so for another hour. We're going to be kind of trying to consolidate some questions just to make sure we've got enough time to answer what everyone's bringing forward. But please, do that. And if you just want to share some comments, share your thoughts, share your experiences, connect with other people in the audience, you can use the chat to do that as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Dee.
Hi, I'm Diane Dorigo, Nuclear Waste Project Director at Nuclear Information and Resource Service, and been here for quite a while. And I'm looking at the list of participants, and I've worked with very, very many of you over the decades, and am thrilled to see so many of you here, and also even more thrilled to see people whose names I've never seen before. So we've got people who've been in this fight for decades, people who started the anti-nuclear fight in the earliest days. And the issue that is pervasive through all of it, one of the issues is nuclear waste. We have been busy fighting the nuclear waste threats from nuclear power and connected nuclear weapons in the past years, and have plans to do so even more in the year to come. Tim and Hannah have outlined some of the work to stop subsidies and bailouts for old nuclear and funding for so-called new advanced nuclear, which is totally pie in the sky. But those are the efforts that we really need to win to prevent more waste from being made. Because as all of us will probably agree, it's impossible to isolate radioactive waste, some of it, for as long as it remains hazardous. We don't have a history of isolating millions of years dangerous material. So continuing the phase out of nuclear power and preventing the false hope of so-called advanced new reactors, which threaten bringing on renewable, sustainable energy and efficiency, is where we need to go. As many of you know, NIRS has been tracking the nuclear industry and the government. We then alert and mobilize allied groups and folks like yourselves to take action. We call on our elected officials to make protective laws and to prevent weakening the existing laws. We call on our so-called regulators to enforce those laws and regulations and not to give exemptions. We're calling on our elected officials to not misdirect our tax dollars to make more nuclear power in its long-lasting dangerous waste. High-level and so-called low-level waste are created at every step of the nuclear power and weapons fuel chain. Radioactivity is routinely released into the air and water, legally and sometimes illegally, at every step of the chain, the fuel chain, from mining and milling uranium to conversion from solid uranium to a gas, in order to concentrate or enrich it in uranium-235 needed for both power and weapons, and fabricating the fuel. Some of the dirtiest facilities are the fuel fabrication facilities, and then using that fuel for a relatively short time to make energy, and mainly to create massive amounts of nuclear waste, of radioactivity, millions of times more radioactivity than started out, and some radioactivity that remains dangerous literally into the millions of years and longer. Nuclear power is threatening our environment, our economics, our hope for a truly sustainable and just energy future, and our democracy. With the now proposed international nuclear spread of nuclear technology legislation proposed by Manchin, which has gone through the committee and the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate and going to the Senate floor is really a proliferation nightmare, and it would spread nuclear power technology and nuclear waste all around the world, all in the same crazy arms race mentality that it's got to be our reactors, not Russian or Chinese. And we do need to take that on even in the days and weeks to come. And of course, in the year to come. And so this is a way that this plutonium economy that would be created is another way that our democracy and international hope for democracy is threatened. NIRS and our allies, including many of you, have successfully prevented the unprecedented nuclear transport campaign that would result from consolidating the high-level nuclear waste at a supposedly temporary site. One of the threats right now facing all of us, and particularly Texas and New Mexico as the proposed sites, is the transport of irradiated fuel from nuclear power. It is the most radioactive material in the world. It is comprised of over 95% of all of the radioactivity in nuclear power and weapons waste. It is in the irradiated fuel. So when people talk about reprocessing or recycling, as they call it, what they're doing is releasing and liberating this massive, intensive amount of radioactivity. Each of these trucks or train cars has more plutonium than was released in the Nagasaki, the plutonium bomb. Each of them has more cesium than was released from the Chernobyl ongoing accident or disaster. And each container gives off radioactivity as it moves. So even without an accident, there can be radioactive exposures, and with radioactive materials passing through communities, towns, rivers, railroad tracks, farmland, busy cities, passing through regularly over the next 40 years to a supposedly centralized consolidated storage site. We're impacting the whole country, and there will be some number of accidents, and there will be some that release radioactivity. So we have successfully prevented over the years this transport campaign, but we're on the precipice of it with legislation coming down the pike, and the Department of Energy, against federal law, is promoting supposedly consent-based siting of these temporary nuclear waste sites, illegal under federal law. Yet our tax dollars are being used in a campaign that we'll be seeing in the year to come, with the Department of Energy hiring, paying various other entities to promote the DOE's lies about nuclear waste and to try to convince communities to volunteer to take this material for supposedly temporary basis. So the Department of Energy's consent-based siting program is a threat to our safety, to our energy, and to our to the real responsible management of the waste that has been generated. So that's one of the ways that we're threatened with nuclear waste. That is by the federal agency action, by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensing supposedly interim CIS, consolidated interim storage sites, by congressional action to change the law to legalize sending waste to supposedly interim sites. And the reason that Congress does not allow temporary sites is that they will become de facto permanent if there is no permanent place for them. So the congressional action, the DOE, Department of Energy, and the nuclear regulatory action are ones that we'll have to continue and accelerate our tracking and our watchdogging and our opposition to the really bad ideas. And then Tim mentioned some of the states. that have been promoting old and new nuclear. We've got this wild, crazy Michigan governor trying to restart the old closed nuclear reactor at Palisades, which has been closed and was denied funding to restart or to continue operating. We've got the state of California legislature funding millions of dollars to keep Diablo running beyond its closing dates. We've got Ohio, as Tim mentioned, illegally passing legislation and now pushing for more that would promote more nuclear technology. We've got states reversing their bans on new nuclear, on any nuclear. West Virginia, one of them, several have, and I think it's something that NIRS will work with people to prevent reversing these bans on nuclear as the threats arise. We also are tracking the ongoing efforts of the nuclear industry and the government to pretend that radioactive waste isn't radioactive and to recycle it into the marketplace, to send it to regular garbage. We've now got the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which denied its policy. It canceled its very low level waste policy last year and now is determining that it's okay to do it in Texas for Texas nuclear power reactors to send their waste to unregulated, unlicensed nuclear waste sites. This is a fight that we have fought at NIRS and worked with many, many, many of you over the decades, 15 times, 16 times that we fought the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Energy to prevent nuclear waste from being treated as if it's not radioactive. And so those efforts continue to be a threat to us, and we're going to have to continue to take that on. We've got importing and exporting of nuclear waste in and out of the country to processors. We've got a lot of processors in Tennessee and in the state of Washington and in Pennsylvania and a few other states, but Tennessee is the big center for nuclear waste to be burned and shredded and potentially released to unregulated destinations for dumping or recycling and blending in with the recycling streams. So as Tim and Hannah pointed out very directly, we are threatened by the utilities, the merchant nuclear power owners, by nuclear lobbyists, buying congressional members and committees with power, the committees with the power and jurisdiction over nuclear issues, keep funneling more money to make more nuclear waste. We've even got so-called environmentalists who don't understand the dangers of nuclear and radiation, promoting nuclear or not fighting it off. So we're going from the frying pan to the fire when we really need to be carbon-free, nuclear-free, and push for real renewables, real sustainable efficiency. I mentioned the Department of Energy's consent-based siting, the NRC giving permission for deregulating waste, the efforts to get communities to volunteer to take this waste, which will obviously be targeting the poorer communities that are more desperate for income and jobs and will fall to the illusion that nuclear waste provides that. And then the EPA continuing to weaken radioactive standards. Congress attempting to reverse its ban on consolidated storage. And that danger is magnified exponentially as more waste exists now than did when this idea was first rejected by Congress in the 1980s. So as we expand our collaboration with frontline communities and continue to sound the alarm at every step, mobilizing opposition against the odds. We need your continuing moral support, your action-oriented support, and your financial support. And we hope that you'll be able to give some tonight and work with us in the year to come. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Dee. And, I think one of the things that, that really, I think, kind of just makes it clear why we need to be focusing on energy democracy is because, if having democratic rights to, to participate in the regulation, of the utilities and of the energy companies, that are impacting us, weren't so important, then they wouldn't be working so hard to get those rights taken away from us. In terms of what, some of the things that Diane was talking about in terms of, deregulating radioactive waste, in terms of, even one of the things that the NRC Nuclear Regulatory Commission is doing this year is trying to deregulate the decommissioning process so that the public doesn't have any rights to intervene, and streamlining the regulations for licensing new reactors so that it'll make it, even harder, if not impossible for communities to get a hearing over the construction of a nuclear power plant. All of those things are just such clear signs of why democracy is so essential for being able to protect our environment and to advance the energy future that we need. And so that's really, I think, in terms of the work that we're doing, in states like Alabama and Louisiana and Kentucky, working with grassroots groups and state coalitions to advance energy democracy reforms, why that's so essential to being able to, to turn the tide and to win the future that we need. And so, Quinn, can we get an update on where we are with the fundraising?
Absolutely. Let me give it a refresh here. We are so close to our goal, you guys.
Amazing, everyone. Gosh, thank you so much. We are getting so close. This is really terrific. This is, we are raising the barn tonight. This is, this is kind of a first kind of an event for NIRS to be doing this kind of community fundraising, sort of a, kind of an online telethon sort of thing. But, but we really appreciate the feedback that you're giving us through the support and the questions and the comments that we're seeing. And so now let's get into it, and let's turn the focus back to what you all want to know about. We're going to have Denise, who's been kind of monitoring the queue and the questions that people are putting in. Denise, if you can kind of start feeding us some questions and giving us some things to respond to, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi, this is Denise Jacobsberg. Let's see here. I have a denier friend who is quite capable in being civil. He critiqued your statement in Fusion. Who can I connect about that? Who can I connect with about that?
Probably with me would be just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was Connie Klein has asked, could NIRS provide a list of the national grassroots organizations they are working with? So locally, we don't necessarily duplicate efforts.
Sure. Yeah, this is one of the things that NIRS was actually founded to do, was to kind of be a national networking hub for the grassroots movement. And so, if you are curious about who else is working on these issues or related issues in your area, we can connect you with those, as well as with national organizations that may be working in that area too. So, what you can do is you can either call the office at 301-270-6477. You can use the contact form on our website, or you can just email us directly at nirs@nirs.org, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Okay. Next question from Joe DeMar. Are there plans to fight the California PUC's decisions to slash solar power reimbursement rates by 75% while subsidizing Diablo Canyon nuke plants with billions?
The answer to both of those questions, or both parts of that question, is yes. And there are lots of groups in California that are fighting against, the changes that the California PUC is, proposing to make to the way that solar people's rooftop solar panels are metered. You guys may have heard about or may be familiar with the concept of net metering, which is, where if you've got solar panels, on your house or on your property, and you generate more electricity than you're using at that time, then your meter runs backwards, and essentially, you get paid by the utility at the full cost of the retail electricity for that. The Utility Commission in California, under tremendous pressure from these, again, corrupt utilities, Southern California, Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric and whatnot, San Diego Gas and Electric, is proposing to basically gut the net metering regulation to get so that people can't guarantee how much they'll be paid for their solar, and to really undermine people's ability to afford solar in some cases. There are groups in California that are fighting that at the Utility Commission. It is a pitched battle, and so that is happening, and that is happening at the same time as the fight to keep to preserve the closure agreement for Diablo Canyon is happening. And in fact, this is another really important example of where energy democracy has played a critical role, even in relationship to the closure of Diablo. When the Utility Commission approved the settlement between the utility company PG&E and the environmental groups, including Friends of the Earth, National Resources Defense Council, Environment California, and others, that started a process where the Utility Commission had to basically figure out what was how they were going to replace the power from Diablo Canyon without raising emissions. And the utility companies again were at it again, pushing for new. They said that we're going to need new gas plants. We're going to need new pipelines for natural gas to replace this. And people in California really got riled up and were upset, and not just and didn't just lobby their legislators and the Utility Commission about it, but groups intervened in the planning proceedings that the Utility Commission organized, and again we're able to get funded through the intervenor fund in California, this bedrock and energy democracy provision that they have. And in the end of that process, the Utility Commission in California came up with a plan to build the biggest renewable energy and energy storage plan in the nation's history, to require that over 20,000 megawatts of renewables and storage be brought online by the year after Diablo Canyon closes, with no fossil fuel power plants as part of that plan, and in fact enough to phase out a bunch of other fossil fuel power plants at the same time as closing Diablo Canyon. This is the crazy thing about what the governor is doing in trying to override this historic plan and this historic agreement. And to be clear, the Utility Commission itself in California hasn't said that they need to continue Diablo's operations. This is overriding the democratic wins that the public has had. That's what the utilities want to see happen. That's why they're opposing essentially energy democracy forms in all the in states all over the country. Mm. That's really why this work is so important, is because we've shown what can happen through energy democracy in states like California, and the utility industry is rebelling against it.
We've had a couple of questions in here by Lawrence Abbott asking whether NIRS would support the move to amend. And as best I can see it, we would certainly do that. I'm sure that we do. It's something, a formality that we can take care of. But that's been in here a few times.
Thanks.
I think historically we have supported it, in fact.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would expect we had.
And for those who who want to know, Move to Amend is a movement and an organization to amend the U.S. Constitution to take away corporate personhood, and to be able to restore our democracy at the very basic level of making it clear that this country is for the people, of the people, and by the people, and to get the corporate influence out of our federal elections.
Okay, I'm going to ask this one first. Can you talk about how churches and faith-based communities can support clean energy alternatives without going to major utility companies?
Sure, and I think if you're really interested in that, and there's a lot of work being done in congregations around the country, and not just Christian congregations, but Jewish congregations, Muslim congregations, and others. Tremendous amount of work happening, in faith communities around the country to both green their own congregations, but to expand the availability of renewable energy more broadly. And so and for that really important work, I would actually, even if you're really interested in that, I would refer you to the network of the national organization and the network of state chapters for interfaith power and light, which has both been an ally, to NIRS in a lot of the work that we do, but is also just really spearheading, that really important grassroots work, enabling people to live their faith in terms of their, protecting the environment and protecting the climate.
And this sort of segues into Jesse Deerenwater's question. Will you be seeking to work with folks who are already doing this energy democracy work, which we have, I believe?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jesse. And in fact, we are. And what prompted us to do this is that we're actually embarking on a joint project with groups in 3 states next year, in Kentucky, Alabama, and Louisiana. To do that in a focused way, and to really start piloting ways in which we can be building strategies for energy democracy reforms, even in states where where you would think that that politically it's too steep of a hill to be able to get up with that. And so that's kind of the one of the examples of the work that we're actually talking about doing. And we've done that, and we actually have, this isn't the first time that we've done it. One of the projects that NIRS, was involved in, this is recently in the last few years, was a coalition called the Maryland Energy Democracy, the Marylanders for Energy Democracy and Affordability, which was a coalition that came out of a big fight against Exelon, the big nuclear corporation that took over all of the utilities in Maryland and DC and Delaware and parts of Jersey and Virginia. And through a really corrupt process where they were buying off politicians and getting to get these deals approved. But coming out of that, we really knew that that because this largest utility company in America was going to be now the taking over all the utilities in this whole part of the country, that we were going to need to mobilize for energy democracy to push back against that kind of corporate power. And in fact, we saw the effect of Exelon coming in the way that it did, with all that money and all that power right away, where Maryland had been making and DC had been making really strong strides towards renewables and climate action and climate justice, and within months of that happening, new utility commissioners were being appointed, and cutting back on the initiatives that Maryland was doing that had the same thing happen in DC. We saw this juggernaut coming and organized a coalition in Maryland, with other allies like Solar United Neighbors and the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and others, to push back on that agenda. And it really had an effect of helping broaden, eventually helping broaden the climate movement in Maryland. And now there's a whole there's a much broader climate and environmental justice movement organizing itself in Maryland now, that wasn't happening a few years ago. That's, I think, the level at which we're hoping to be able to to help strengthen and broaden grassroots networks and people to represent themselves and their communities in utility regulation, in these in these public processes, to be able to decide what's best for their communities and stand up against these utility companies toe to toe.
Okay. From Amy Hubbard, she heard recently that Charlie Kamenov, who was a big anti-nuke spokesperson, said that he would support keeping existing nuclear plants open for a while in order to slow down climate change. That surprised me. What do you think? Keep the existing plants open for a while longer, but don't build any more or shut them down shut them all down as soon as possible.
Kim, I'm going to let you take that, but I want to mention to Amy that Charlie was never really anti-nuclear. He's only looked at economics, and the economics he interpreted as anti-nuclear at one point, and now he has completely ignored the waste issue. For decades, I've asked him to help include the waste issue in the equations, and he simply doesn't do that. But I will let Tim take on the larger economic question.
Sure. Well, I think that there's a lot of things happening around the whole question of nuclear and climate. I mean, there is a legitimate debate to be had about, like, given the urgency of the climate crisis, like, what's the best path to zero emissions and protecting the climate, and even to negative emissions, because the 350.org was founded on the notion that we shouldn't get above 350 parts per million in the atmosphere. Now we're over 450. In order to stabilize the climate, we're going to need to do even more than that. So there's a debate to be had. The problem is that the nuclear industry has spent a tremendous amount of money building up front groups and hiring PR companies and all this dark money spending, like I mentioned about the bailouts, to try to confuse the debate about what needs to happen. But what's also happening is the utility companies have been blocking renewable energy and energy efficiency and the real solutions to the climate crisis for decades. And so there's people that are rightly concerned about climate who are like, why are we going backward on something, when we should be moving forward? And the real answer to that question, what we've said to Charlie, Kamanoff and other people who have legitimate concerns about climate, is that the solution isn't bailing out nuclear power plants and keeping nuclear power plants running that are poisoning our environment and poisoning environmental justice communities and risking disaster. But that we need to be making the transition to renewables faster and easier. And that's really what this, that's really one of the things that one of the reasons that we are, that we really see the need for energy democracy to be able to make happen, is to overcome this this really this really disastrous opposition to renewables that the utilities have basically, been pushing in order, pushing for the sake of profit. And I don't think anyone really disagrees with that. And so I think that, once we get the country going in the right direction in terms of, energy democracy and having a voice, we'll be able to, to overcome some of these, some of these, kind of divisive arguments around, whether there's one source of pollution is better for our communities than others.
Right. We had a question before regarding military. Please discuss the fossil lure of fusion being promoted based on the recent military work being done at Lawrence Livermore.
Sure. Does anyone else want to take that?
Well, one of the other questions, I don't know if it's in the chat or the Q&A, is who are some of the people who have critiqued. Oh, it was Lou Zeller, who has critiqued the fusion pitch, and MV Ramana from Vancouver, Gordon Edwards, Arjun Makajani at the IEER.org website. And I'm going to look up the name of a scientist who's a journalist who has done a number of critiques over the decades of how the fusion proponents have misled in the past to give the impression that they're getting more energy out than is going in, but that was actually only at one phase of the equation. So I will search for that and put the answer in the chat.
Thanks, Dee.
And then Tim, you did that blog or that article.
We did, yeah. We published a blog on our website the day after the announcement, or the day of the announcement that the DOE made. And there actually have been continued, many commentaries being issued. There was a great one in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist just a few days ago. A lot of really strong critiques of the whole notion that even that the fusion experiment was even newsworthy. You know, and I think and I think there's also been and actually I would refer people to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists one, because also it gets into the ways in which the experiment was really more about the nuclear weapons program than it was about energy, and we're really just getting a lot of public relations spin from the DOE, trying to make people think that this was about having a new energy source when it isn't. And Denise, you can take me off the spotlight.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, let me get out of this for a second.
And so just Quinn, can we get a quick update on where we are with the fundraising thermometer?
Absolutely. Let me refresh it.
Oh my gosh, everyone, we are so close. We are within $100 of the goal. Thank you so much for all of the support and for being here tonight. This is really terrific. We're just about there. And if it makes a difference, I'll reiterate that the donations that people make tonight are being matched 1-to-1 by another generous donor. So we're really not, we're really within $100 of raising $10,000 and not just $5,000. So thank you so much for that. Great. And Denise, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we do. Steve Beers is asking about, there's a lot of pro-nuke drivel in a variety of publications. I assume this industry is just disinformation, but there is no disclosure of sources. Plus, there is, I assume, advocacy from liberal centrist amnesiacs to ignore the industry's actual record. How do we counter that?
So, Hannah, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
I'm preparing some answers to some questions about SMRs right now. So.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you're not crazy for thinking that something weird is going on here, because it's absolutely true that something is. And we've actually, we haven't. This isn't the first time that we've seen the industry really queue up, some sort of, kind of AstroTurf campaign or some sort of, confusing PR initiative. We saw the industry starting to do this actually in 2014, when Exelon founded this front organization called Nuclear Matters. And they hired a bunch of former senators and federal government officials to act as spokespeople for why we needed to be bailing out old nuclear power plants to save the climate. But it's expanded much more from there over the years. There's much more money being put out to form different, what we call AstroTurf groups that are fake grassroots organizations. And what we've seen is that some of this isn't even coming just from the utility companies, the big nuclear players like Exelon and First Energy and Duke Energy and whatnot. But there's also there's also a bunch of basically financiers, venture capitalists, who have just sort of become convinced that there's some kind of Silicon Valley type technological breakthrough that's going to be coming from a bunch of startup firms that are kind of, that are trying to design different kinds of reactors. And so we're seeing that there are groups in like New York and California and elsewhere that are being financed by these venture capital firms to basically try to sway the public debate and create a buzz around nuclear power that they're hoping will translate into, some kind of, some kind of Silicon Valley type, bonanza that they'll be able to make a lot of money off their investments. Same thing, the same kind of thing that's happening with cryptocurrency and those sort of things. It's happening with nuclear power, and really they are being effective because of the volume they're able to get through paying these PR companies to promote this, these messages. Again, this is, if we were able to require that the utility companies and others disclose their financial contributions and the money they're putting into these dark money organizations that are, that can make, political contributions and undertake campaigns without having to disclose where their money is coming from. That would really, enable us to point to where the source of all these things is coming from. And again, this is, gets back into the topic of energy democracy and why, and why these kind of reforms are so important.
I would also say that the Department of Energy over the decades has funded nuclear physics departments at universities. Now they're putting resources into the communications departments and actually funding the messaging as well as the promotion of the science, nuclear engineering programs and that kind of thing.
That's right. That's right. In fact, we've seen this happening, you know, in the last few years with, you know, one of like there's been a front group that was founded by, you know, a former Department of Energy contractor and someone from one of these kind of corporate funded groups to essentially do sort of social media listening to figure out, what to try to figure out what messages would sway people's opinions about nuclear power. And that's kind of sophisticated, communications, science that the industry is using to try to sway the public's opinion about this. I think the important thing is that, when it comes down to, where public opinion is on nuclear power, that it's really not making that much of a difference. And people are, as divided about nuclear power, in the U.S. as ever. But it does, but it would make things a lot easier, if the sources of all the money for this pro-nuclear propaganda, were exposed.
We have a question about uranium. For a while, uranium mining was into decline due to a glut and low prices for yellowcake. Can you address the current situation with uranium mining nationally?
Sure. Well, Dee, do you want to take this one?
Well, so there are quite a few facilities in the United States, mines and mills, that are not operating. They never were licensed. They're on standby, on hold. And as we have been calling for an embargo on importing uranium from Russia, there have been efforts, largely by Senator Barrasso, to develop a strategic uranium reserve and to get a lot of these facilities up and running. Meanwhile, communities have been fighting both existing and proposed facilities around the U.S. And our position has been to fight uranium mines and mills and processing in the U.S. as well as around the world. We don't want to, the same dangers happen in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Africa, in Australia, and largely indigenous communities. The real answer, as with the waste, is to shift to non-extractive, renewable, sustainable energies. And so the uranium, there's this, it's like with a nuclear waste dump. Well, if we don't keep it here at the reactor, if we keep it here at the reactor, then it's going to threaten us. We got to dump it on someone else. So with the uranium mining, we've got mining going on around the world, not as much in the US and Canada, but definitely some. And our work, we just put out a fact sheet this summer, just a basic fact sheet on uranium, because that whole part of the fuel chain is ignored by promoters of nuclear technology. They act as if the little uranium pellets that are in the fuel rods are just little things that have appeared, when in fact there's a major destructive industry in order to get to that point.
Yeah, and so so what we've seen happening in the last couple of years is that there's been this push by a few uranium mining companies that have essentially they've got mines that they can't use profitably, and so they're trying to get the federal government to create this subsidy through this unnecessary uranium reserve to run their uranium mines at a profit. The things that this isn't obviously just about money. There's there's people like in especially in the Southwest where some new mines are being proposed that are really concerned about what's going to happen and about whether especially with the war in Ukraine and the price of uranium starting to go up, that there could be an expansion of uranium mining in the U.S. And this is a real concern because, the reality is that, they don't even need to mine uranium to dramatically contaminate the environment. There's places, like, near the Canyon mine in, in the Four Corners region on Navajo and the Havasupai land, where just the exploration, the test drilling, has put the aquifer in danger of being contaminated that feeds into the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon. That there are sites on the Navajo Nation that were never actually mined, but where they did prospecting, where the land is, the land is seriously contaminated. This is, just even the, the promotion of uranium mining, can be devastating to communities.
And I would also add that HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium, is a proposed fuel to be created in the US by the Department of Energy. Ohio's where the target is at this point. And that kind of fuel is not in use right now, yet we're being, it would potentially fuel new reactors, the designs for which have not even been licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we're hearing an argument that, oh, we can't stop importing HALEU from Russia. But yeah, we don't need HALEU from Russia. We don't need HALEU at all. And the other thing about this HALEU fuel is that it is so highly, it's enriched up to almost 20%. Over 20% is considered weapons grade level. And the allowable, well, you can correct that if I misstated that.
Not weapons grade, but high enriched uranium, yeah. But close enough that it doesn't take much more to get to weapons grade.
Right. So we're talking, the application for HALEU would have allowed for a plus or minus that would have allowed the enrichment level to go up above the level needed for nuclear weapons.
So on that note, with these advanced new reactor designs, there have been a few questions about small modular reactors in Wyoming, advanced reactors in Wyoming, in Tennessee, West Virginia, and Virginia. And I just can speak to that, and how that connects to our energy democracy work is that it's these private companies, these nuclear research companies, and basically nuclear boosters that are approaching small communities, municipalities, and basically trying to sell, as Dee said, not approved reactor designs as this false promise to sometime in the future build a small modular reactor in those communities. And it's the same story that we've seen with the quote nuclear renaissance for decades, which is price hikes, project delays, misinformation, and information being withheld. And part of our work is working with all of these different communities, and they're growing. There's reactor proposals across the Midwest, across the West, across all these different communities that so far don't have nuclear power as part of their energy profile. And so we're working with groups to try and combat all of these small modular reactor proposals and ensure that they have the information about the track record of the nuclear industry, selling false promises, and really underselling how expensive and how long these reactors will take if they ever materialize at all, which so far none have been are really on the table. And so just thank you for that question for the folks who asked about the small modular reactors. That's a really, really important and large piece of our energy democracy work. And there are groups across the country that we're working with to try and create a national campaign where folks can take resources that have worked in some states and apply them when nuclear companies come to their own communities and try to sell their city councils on buying into small modular reactors.
And also on that new reactor front, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is developing new regulations that are much weaker for licensing the new reactors. And we've got one question raised, will NIRS be generating talking points for the Part 31 rulemaking when it comes up for public comment? And we absolutely will.
We just surpassed our goal, our fundraising goal, everybody. Thank you so much. This makes a huge difference, and we're just overjoyed that you all joined and that you all were moved to give to NIRS.
Well, this is really great. Thank you so much, everyone. And
a couple of other things that we're wanting to support people on is this threat now of closing coal plants to become nuclear plants. And that's the frying pan to the fire. It's taking one polluting industry and replacing it with another. And the fact that nuclear steals the resources needed for real renewables. Looks like more money went into nuclear than into renewables in the legislation that passed. I don't know if anybody's compiled a comparison, but a massive amount. We don't want to replace one. What is it? Someone mentioned you going from smoking to heroin.
yeah, thanks for that, Diane. And Denise, are there any more questions?
Joe DeMar asked a question about Ohio's HB 434, which would have created an authority, quote unquote, which would have complete authority over all things nuclear and radioactive. That wasn't only completely immune from public input or participation. It wasn't even answerable to the legislature or governor. He said, we beat this session. We beat it for this session, but it was the third attempt. How can we prevent bad legislation like this from getting as far along in the process as it did this session?
Sure. Well, Diane, you filed our testimony on that bill, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, what they're proposing in Ohio is an agency that isn't even accountable to it's unaccountable and yet would promote nuclear technology, and it seems somewhat parallel but even less regulated than the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which was originally the New York State Atomic Development Authority, Research and Development Authority, which started the West Valley reprocessing site, which has never been cleaned up. We're looking into the $10 billion range to clean up this one facility that operated for about 6 years. And so now Ohio is wanting to set up an agency to promote nuclear technology. But Joe's question is how to fight it. And our approach is the power of the people, is the public education and organizing and putting pressure on our electeds. And it is real frustrating in an era where it looks like even if you went to the top court in the land, that you might not really get justice, but we have to keep fighting on it. And so organizing, public education. I do think we need to develop a better campaign to counter the lies that are coming out about nuclear. I don't think that we or our allied groups have gotten a good handle on that yet, and we don't have a lot of time. So that's got to be an important piece of it.
All right. This one is, let's see, about personal thanks for the past support of Indian Point. 2, with the emergence of a progressive majority Louisiana's Public Service Commission, the creation of Taproot Earth, the long-term monitoring of Savannah River Watch, and the Presidential Climate Justice Committee, co-chaired by pioneer Professor Robert Bullard, among others, do you envision a deepened and broadened Southern just energy strategy?
I mean, I don't want to sort of speak out of my hat here, which I always wear. But, we really see this, there really is a broadening and deepening, movement for renewable energy, for climate justice, for environmental justice, and energy democracy, in the Southeast, in the Gulf South. There's, I mean, in addition to the, to the organizations that we're working with in the 3 states that I mentioned before, there's a tri-state campaign, called Southern People, not Southern Power for Southern People, not Southern Company, which is, across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, that is pushing for, energy democracy reforms and climate justice and environmental justice, throughout that part of the South. There is the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, which covers most of the Southeast, is headquartered in Florida. There's the Gulf South for the Green New Deal Coalition, which is working across several states to push that kind of progressive climate justice agenda forward. The Southeast is one of the places where it's really at right now, and where that kind of grassroots organizing is happening in a really amazing way. And so people should really pay attention to that. And, and if you can, support organizations, like Georgia Wand, like Arm in Arm, like Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution, the People's Justice Council, Alliance for Affordable Energy, Taproot Earth, and many others who I, who I would be, many others who I would, be remiss in not mentioning. But again, if you're in that part of the country, there's also Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League, who's, Lou Zeller's organization, who's here tonight, that is involved in that work. If they're, if you would like to, to get connected to other organizations in your state or your region that are doing this kind of work, we'll be happy to help connect you if we can.
It's definitely an exciting moment. I think in Louisiana recently, there's a really successful election to the PSC that the Alliance for Affordable Energy worked very, very hard on. And so it sets the stage for some very exciting work to happen in Louisiana and the Southeast. So it shows that this grassroots organizing and building democracy and boots on the ground work really makes an impact. So just wanted to flag that there is a deepened, renewed excitement in the Southeast.
We're almost at the end, but I see a request to mention the research reactors, or the reactors that are mini reactors that are being promoted at different universities. And in fact, there are several around the country that, again, this is Department of Energy funding to try to get more reactors, little ones, big ones, medium ones, and no matter what size, whether they're old or new or advanced or not, they make radioactive waste. If you split the uranium atom, you form other radioactive elements, cesium, strontium, iodine, biologically active. You end up with transuranics that are dangerous, americium, plutonium, into the millions of years, 1/4 to 500,000 for plutonium. And there's no getting around the waste, and there's nowhere for it yet to go. And when it does go somewhere, it's going to be a sacrifice area. And I'm not really into, choosing the sacrifice area. I think our goal has to be to stop the generation and find a way to isolate it as best we can, pass it on to future generations in a way that they can continue to isolate it. We can't pretend there's in a way.
Great. Well, we're at 8:30, everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight, for participating in this, for your great questions and comments. We did surpass our fundraising goal, so thank you everybody for making those donations. And and like we've said multiple times tonight, if there are if you would like to get better connected to other organizations that we can help connect you with in your state or your region, don't hesitate to contact us if you've got questions about about propaganda that you're seeing about nuclear power. Let us know, and when we can help you figure out a response. And we just really look forward to advancing this this energy democracy work and the phase out of nuclear power and the transition to 100% renewable energy in the years to come. And this is just the first step. So thank you for helping us raise the barn. And when we'll be moving this work forward next year.
And I want to thank you for all of your donations tonight, but also a lot of people on this participant list are longtime activists who have sacrificed so much of their own energy and time and resources. And I want to thank everyone and encourage those that can to keep at it. And we should all go out and get some more new folks to help us out.
All right, well, with that, well, good night, everybody, and hope you have a wonderful winter season and whatever holidays you celebrate, and a positive and optimistic new year. Thanks.
Thank you.